This is the story of Daniel and his wife, Rebecca. What begins as an ordinary Thursday afternoon becomes the moment that fractures a 10-year marriage. Sometimes the hardest truth we face isn't the betrayal itself. It's recognizing when forgiveness becomes permission. The flight from Denver had been mercifully short. Daniel pressed his forehead against the cool window of the taxi, watching familiar streets blur past in the late afternoon sun. The conference had ended a day early, some issue with the venue's heating system, and he'd managed to catch a standby flight home. He imagined Rebecca's surprise when he walked through the door. Maybe they'd order Thai food, open that bottle of wine they'd been saving. Their brownstone stood quiet on Maple Street, the oak tree out front casting dappled shadows across the brick facade. Daniel paid the driver and climbed the steps, his laptop bag heavy against his shoulder. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The living room looked normal. Rebecca's reading glasses sat folded on the coffee table beside a half-empty mug. The throw pillows were arranged the way she liked them. Precisely casual, she called it. But something felt off. The air held a strange stillness, like the moment before a storm. "Becca?" His voice echoed through the first floor. No answer. He set down his bag and loosened his tie. Maybe she was napping. She'd been working late shifts at the hospital all month, coming home exhausted, falling asleep before he could tell her about his day. The distance had been growing between them, subtle but undeniable. Small silences, where conversation used to be. Phones checked during dinner. Plans made separately. Daniel climbed the stairs, each step creaking in the old familiar way. Their bedroom door stood slightly ajar. He pushed it open. Rebecca stood by the closet, fully dressed but disheveled, her hair falling loose from its usual neat bun. Her face drained of color when she saw him. "Daniel!" Her voice came out strangled. "Why are you back so soon?" Not "welcome home" or "I missed you." Why are you back so soon? The closet door behind her trembled. Just slightly. A movement so small he might have missed it if he'd blinked. Time seemed to slow. Daniel's mind worked through the possibilities, rejecting each one until only the truth remained. The truth he'd been avoiding, the truth hidden in late-night texts she deleted, in sudden weekend shifts that never appeared on her schedule, in the way she'd stopped meeting his eyes. Rebecca. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, calm, almost detached. "Is someone in our closet?" She opened her mouth, closed it. Tears began streaming down her face, but she didn't move, didn't speak. The closet door opened. A man stepped out tall, younger than Daniel, wearing dress pants and a wrinkled button-down. He wouldn't meet Daniel's eyes. "I should go," the man mumbled, grabbing his jacket from the bed. Rebecca didn't try to stop him. The stranger brushed past Daniel and fled down the stairs. The front door slammed. The silence that followed felt vast and terrible. "Daniel, please!" Rebecca's voice cracked. She reached for him. He stepped back. "How long? It doesn't matter. How long, Rebecca?" She crumpled onto the edge of their bed, the bed they'd picked out together 7 years ago, arguing playfully about firmness levels and thread counts. 3 months. His name is Thomas. He works in radiology. 3 months. Daniel did the math. Their anniversary dinner where she'd been on her phone. The weekend she'd gone to visit her sister. The morning she'd suggested he take the Denver conference, practically pushed him to go. "I'm sorry." She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. "I'm so sorry. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I'll end it. I'll do anything. Please, Daniel, please don't leave." He looked at his wife, really looked at her, the woman he'd proposed to on a beach in Santorini, the woman who'd held his hand through his father's funeral, the woman who'd promised, in front of everyone they loved, to be faithful. "We need time," he said quietly. "I need to think." He turned and walked out of the bedroom, down the stairs, out of the house that no longer felt like home. Daniel spent that night in a hotel downtown, staring at the ceiling, while his phone buzzed with messages he couldn't bring himself to read. By morning, he'd gone through anger, grief, numbness, and back to anger again. The cycle was exhausting. Rebecca showed up at his office the next day. His assistant, Monica, gave him an apologetic look as Rebecca walked past the desk uninvited. "We need to talk," Rebecca said, closing his office door. She looked terrible eyes, swollen, makeup free, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. "Please, Daniel, just listen." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat, hands twisting in her lap. "I ended it," she said. "I called Thomas last night and told him it was over. I blocked his number. I blocked him everywhere." She pulled out her phone, opened her contacts, her social media apps, showing him each deletion. "See, he's gone. Completely." Daniel watched this performance with a strange detachment. "You think that fixes it?" "No." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "No, I know it doesn't fix anything, but it's a start. Daniel, I love you. I've always loved you. What happened with Thomas, it wasn't about you. It was about me. About being selfish and stupid and—" Her voice broke. "I can't lose you. You're everything to me. Then why?" "I don't know." She covered her face with her hands. "I felt invisible. You were always working, always traveling, and Thomas paid attention to me. He listened. He made me feel seen. But it was shallow and meaningless. And the moment you walked through that door, I knew God. I knew I'd destroyed the only thing that mattered." Daniel wanted to harden his heart against her words. But 10 years of marriage doesn't dissolve in a day. He remembered the good times, lazy Sunday mornings, road trips where they'd gotten hopelessly lost, the way she'd laugh at his terrible jokes. "I'll go to therapy," Rebecca continued, leaning forward. "Individual therapy, couples therapy, whatever you want. I'll work on myself. I'll figure out why I did this and make sure it never happens again. Please, Daniel, give me a chance to make this right." He studied her face, searching for insincerity and finding only desperate hope. Maybe people could change. Maybe this could be one of those marriages that emerged stronger from crisis. His parents had survived his father's affair. His sister and her husband had rebuilt after similar betrayal. Why should he and Rebecca be different? "Okay," he said finally. Rebecca's head snapped up. "Okay? We'll try therapy. But I need you to understand. This is your one chance, Rebecca. One. If I ever find out you've done anything like this again, we're done. No discussion, no second chances. Do you understand?" She nodded frantically, coming around the desk to embrace him. He let her, but his arms stayed at his sides, unable to return the gesture. Over the following weeks, Rebecca threw herself into rebuilding trust. She found a therapist, Dr. Patricia Moss, highly recommended, and went twice a week. She gave Daniel access to her phone, her email, her location at all times. She came home directly after work, texted him throughout the day, planned date nights. They started couples therapy too, Dr. Turve. Gregory Winters had kind eyes and a gentle way of asking difficult questions. In his office, they unpacked years of small resentments and unspoken needs. Daniel admitted he'd been emotionally distant, buried in work to avoid confronting problems at home. Rebecca acknowledged her need for validation from others stemmed from childhood wounds she'd never addressed. Progress was slow and painful, but it was progress. Some nights, Daniel could almost forget what had happened. They'd laugh over dinner or fall asleep holding hands, and he'd think maybe they'd make it through this. 3 months after the affair ended, Rebecca suggested a weekend away at bed and breakfast in Vermont, where they'd spent their first anniversary. Daniel agreed. They needed this, needed to create new memories untainted by betrayal. The weekend was almost perfect. They hiked through autumn leaves, ate at small local restaurants, made love for the first time since the affair. On Sunday morning, lying in bed with sunlight streaming through lace curtains, Rebecca turned to him. "Thank you," she whispered. Thank you for giving me another chance. I won't waste it. I promise. He wanted to believe her. He chose to believe her. 6 months after the affair, Daniel's company sent him to a conference in Seattle. 3 days of presentations on emerging market trends normally. He'd look forward to it. But leaving Rebecca still triggered anxiety he couldn't quite shake. You should go, Rebecca insisted when he mentioned cancelling. We're good now, Daniel. We're really good. And Dr. Winters says we need to rebuild normalcy, right? That includes work travel. She was right. They couldn't let the affair control their lives forever. He booked his flight. The conference was tedious, endless panels in overlit hotel ballrooms, networking cocktail hours that ran too late. Daniel found himself checking his phone constantly, looking at the photos Rebecca sent, her coffee that morning, the sunset from their porch, a selfie with the caption "Missing you." On the second night, he called her around 9. She answered on the first ring, slightly breathless. "Hey, babe," she said. "How's Seattle?" "Boring." "How was your day?" "Good." "Quiet." "I meal prep for the week and watched that documentary you recommended." Her voice sounded normal, easy. He relaxed slightly. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important, the kind of comfortable conversation that had been missing for so long. When they hung up, Daniel felt lighter. They were going to be okay. The next afternoon, his flight home was delayed by mechanical issues. What should have been a 6 p.m. landing became 9:30. He texted Rebecca from the airport, but she didn't respond. Probably asleep, she'd been pulling 12-hour shifts again. The taxi dropped him home at 11. The house was dark except for a lamp in the living room. Daniel unlocked the door quietly, not wanting to wake her if she dozed off on the couch. She wasn't on the couch. He climbed the stairs, dropping his bag in the hallway. Their bedroom light was off. He pushed open the door. In the darkness he could make out Rebecca's form in bed. She sat up quickly, pulling the covers to her chest. "Daniel, you're home early? I didn't expect." Her voice was high, panicked. He flicked on the light. Rebecca squinted in the brightness, and behind her he saw movement, a shape shifting under the comforter on his side of the bed. Everything stopped. The world narrowed to this moment, this grotesque repetition of history. "No," Daniel said softly. "No, Rebecca." The covers shifted, and a different man emerged, older than Thomas, balding, wearing Daniel's bathrobe. "I should leave," the man said, exactly like Thomas had said 6 months ago. "Yeah," Daniel replied, "you should." The man dressed quickly, grabbed his things, and left. Daniel stood perfectly still while Rebecca started crying the same desperate sobs, the same tears, as if her grief could somehow undo what he'd just witnessed. "Daniel, please, I can explain." "His name?" Daniel interrupted. "Tell me his name." "It doesn't matter. Tell me his name. Rebecca." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Vincent. He's a physical therapist at the hospital. Daniel, listen, this was different. I was stressed and you were gone, and he was just there. Stop." The word came out sharp. "When did it start?" She hesitated. "A month ago." A month ago, while they were in couples therapy, while she was promising Dr. Winters they'd turned a corner. While the text, him sunset photos, and missing you selfies. "Did you ever actually end things with Thomas?" The question came from somewhere cold and analytical in his mind. Rebecca's silence was answer enough. Oh my God. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, their bed, where he'd forgiven her, where he'd tried to rebuild trust. "You never stopped." "Did you?" "I did," she protested. "I ended it with Thomas, just like I said. But then a few weeks later, we ran into each other at the hospital, and we talked. And so Thomas again. And now Vincent. Anyone else I should know about?" She didn't answer. "Rebecca." "Anyone else?" "There was someone else," she whispered. for a few weeks in April, but it didn't mean anything. None of them meant anything. Daniel stood. He felt remarkably calm, as if his body had finally accepted what his mind had known for months. This marriage was over. Had been over, perhaps, long before he caught her the first time. "I'm done," he said. "No, Daniel, please, we can fix this. More therapy, more time. I'll do anything. You said that before." He pulled his suitcase from the closet, the same closet where Thomas had hidden, and began throwing clothes into it. "You promised it would never happen again. You looked me in the eye and promised, Rebecca." She grabbed his arm. I know I did. And I'm sorry. I'm so, so sorry. But people make mistakes. This isn't a mistake." He gently removed her hand. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something hurtful in an argument. This is a choice you made. Multiple choices. A pattern." He zipped the suitcase closed and picked it up. "Where are you going?" "Hotel tonight. Tomorrow I'm calling a lawyer." "Daniel, no, please don't do this. I love you. I love you so much." He looked at her one last time, this woman he'd thought he'd grow old with. "No, Rebecca. You love the security I provide, the life we built. But you don't love me. If you did, you couldn't keep doing this." He walked out of the bedroom, down the stairs, out the door. Behind him he heard her calling his name, sobbing, begging. He kept walking. Daniel's lawyer, a sharp woman named Olivia Grant, had seen it all before. She barely blinked when he recounted the story in her office 2 days later. "Do you have evidence?" she asked, pen poised over a legal pad. "I saw them, both times. Text messages, photos, anything documented?" He shook his head. "Just what I witnessed. That might be enough, depending on whether Rebecca contests the divorce. Often in these cases, the guilty party doesn't fight. Too embarrassed." Olivia leaned back in her chair. "What are you looking for in terms of settlement?" Daniel hadn't thought much beyond ending the marriage. Now he considered the practicalities. "The house is in both our names. I don't want it too many memories. We can sell it, split the proceeds. No alimony on either side. Clean break. Any shared accounts. Retirement funds?" They spent an hour cataloguing 10 years of entangled finances. When Olivia finally sent him home with a stack of forms to review, Daniel felt hollowed out. How had it come to this? How had a decade of love and partnership dissolved into asset division and legal terminology? He was staying at his friend Nathan's apartment temporarily. Nathan, who'd been his roommate in college, had offered his spare room without hesitation. "Stay as long as you need," Nathan said, handing Daniel a beer that first night. "My couch is your couch. Well, technically my spare room is your spare room, but you get it." The familiar attempt at humor helped. A little. Rebecca called constantly. Daniel didn't answer. She texted long, rambling messages that oscillated between apology and blame. He'd driven her to this, she wrote. His emotional distance, his constant travel, his inability to forgive her properly the first time. If he'd really forgiven her, really moved past it, she wouldn't have felt the need to seek comfort elsewhere. He read these messages with a strange detachment, as if they were addressed to someone else. Was she right? Had he contributed to this disaster by being distant, by holding the first affair over her head even while claiming forgiveness? Dr. Winters called, leaving a voicemail. "Daniel, I heard about what happened. I'd like to see you if you're willing. Process this together. You don't have to face it alone." Daniel made an appointment. He owed it to himself to understand how he'd missed the signs, how he'd chosen belief over evidence. In Dr. Winter's office, the familiar leather chair felt different without Rebecca in the room. "How are you doing?" Dr. Winters asked. "I honestly don't know," Daniel admitted. "Some moments I'm furious, others I just feel tired." "That's normal. You're grieving not just the relationship but the future you thought you had." "I keep wondering if I could have done something differently. If I'd been more present after the first affair. If I'd been more vigilant." "Stop." Dr. Winter's voice was gentle but firm. "Daniel, I need you to hear this. Rebecca's choices were her own. You can examine your role in the marriage's problems, and that's healthy. But you did not cause her to betray you. Not the first time, and certainly not the second, third, or fourth. She said there were others. I know. She told me in an emergency session yesterday. Dr. Winters hesitated. I can't share details of her individual work, but I can tell you this. Rebecca has deep-rooted issues with self-worth and impulse control that existed long before your marriage. She used external validation affairs as a coping mechanism. That's not about you. That's about her unresolved trauma and unhealthy patterns. The explanation helped, a little. Daniel wasn't crazy. He hadn't imagined the distance between them or failed in some fundamental way. Rebecca had needed help. He couldn't provide. Had chosen deception over honesty at every turn. Do you think I was wrong to forgive her the first time? Daniel asked. Dr. Winters considered this. Forgiveness is never wrong. But forgiveness without changed behavior becomes enabling. You gave Rebecca a genuine second chance. She squandered it. That's on her, not you. Daniel filed for divorce the following week. The papers were delivered to Rebecca at the hospital. According to Olivia, Rebecca had been served during a shift break, had read the documents in the hallway, and left work early. Part of Daniel felt guilty for the public humiliation. The larger part, the part that remembered finding Vincent in their bed, felt nothing but a grim satisfaction. Rebecca contested nothing. She signed every document Olivia sent, agreed to every term. The house went on the market. Daniel packed up his belongings from Nathan's place and moved into a small apartment across town, a fresh start, untainted by memories. One evening, 3 weeks into the separation, Daniel came home from work to find Rebecca sitting on the steps outside his building. How did you find me? He asked. Nathan's girlfriend mentioned it. I'm sorry for showing up. I know you don't want to see me. She stood, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the October chill. I just needed to say something. Rebecca, please, just let me say this. He nodded, too tired to argue. I know I destroyed us, she said. I know there's no going back. And I know you probably hate me. I don't hate you, Daniel said, and realized it was true. Hate required energy he no longer had. I'm just done. I understand. But I wanted you to know. I'm getting real help now. Not just therapy appointments I could skip. I checked myself into an intensive outpatient program. 4 nights a week, 3 hours a night. I'm working on the actual issues, the stuff I should have dealt with years ago. That's good, Rebecca. I'm glad you're getting help. I'm doing it for me, she continued, not to win you back or change your mind. I finally understand that I need to fix myself, not for you or anyone else, but because I don't want to be this person anymore. The person who destroys good things, who hurts people who love her. Daniel felt a flicker of something, not hope for their marriage, but hope for Rebecca. That maybe she'd find her way to being whole. I hope it helps, he said sincerely. Me too. She turned to leave, then stopped. Daniel, for what it's worth, you were always enough. The problem was never you. I just couldn't see it until I'd lost everything. She walked away into the darkening evening. Daniel watched her go, then climbed the stairs to his empty apartment. The divorce was finalized on a grey morning in December. Daniel sat in the courthouse hallway, reviewing documents one last time while Olivia made final arrangements with the judge's clerk. Rebecca sat at the opposite end of the hall with her own lawyer, a young man who looked fresh out of law school. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. When the judge signed the papers, Daniel felt no dramatic shift, no sudden lightness or crushing grief. Just a quiet acknowledgement that this chapter had closed. You okay? Olivia asked as they left the courthouse. Yeah, Daniel said. I think I am. The house sold 2 weeks before Christmas. Daniel stood in the empty living room one last time, remembering the day they'd moved and Rebecca dancing through the rooms, planning where every piece of furniture would go, her excitement infectious. He remembered other moments too, The fights they'd had in the kitchen, the lonely nights he'd spent on the couch when work consumed him, the growing distance neither of them had acknowledged until it was too late. The affair hadn't destroyed their marriage, Daniel realized. It had just revealed the cracks that were already there. He locked the door and left the keys with a realtor. Nathan threw a new beginning party at his place on New Year's Eve. Daniel didn't feel like celebrating, but he showed up anyway. The apartment was packed with people, Nathan's girlfriend and her friends, co-workers from Nathan's firm, a few mutual friends from college. "Hey, man." Nathan pulled him aside around 11. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected," Daniel admitted. "Sundays are hard, but I'm sleeping again, eating real food instead of takeout. It's getting easier." "Good." Nathan clapped him on the shoulder. "You deserve better than what she put you through." As midnight approached, everyone gathered around Nathan's tiny television to watch the ball drop in Times Square. Daniel found himself standing next to a woman with dark hair and an easy smile. "I'm Vanessa," she said, extending her hand. "Nathan's co-worker. You're the famous Daniel we've all heard about." "Famous?" He shook her hand, amused. "Nathan's been singing your praises for weeks. Says you're the most resilient person he knows." She tilted her head. "I'm not hitting on you, by the way. Nathan warned us all that you're recovering from a rough divorce and not interested. But I wanted to say hi anyway." Daniel laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in months. "I appreciate the disclaimer." They talked through the countdown, through the cheers and champagne toasts that followed. Vanessa was an architect, passionate about sustainable design, quick-witted and kind. When she mentioned grabbing coffee sometime, as friends, strictly friends, Daniel surprised himself by saying yes. Later, walking home through quiet streets dusted with snow, Daniel thought about forgiveness. He'd forgiven Rebecca after the first affair, believing that love and commitment should overcome mistakes. He'd been right about that, in principle. Forgiveness was important, but he understood now what Dr. Winters had meant. Forgiveness without accountability wasn't mercy, it was permission. He'd forgiven Rebecca's betrayal, but she'd never truly accepted responsibility for it. She'd performed change, going through the motions of therapy and transparency while continuing the very behaviors she'd promised to stop. The second time he'd found her, the third time really, or fourth if you counted all the affairs she'd admitted to, Daniel hadn't forgiven her. Not because he couldn't, but because forgiveness had lost its meaning. You couldn't forgive a pattern. A pattern wasn't a mistake or a momentary failure of judgment. A pattern was a choice, made over and over. He'd left divorce papers on the table that night and walked out. Rebecca had chased him, sobbing, begging. He turned to her on the sidewalk outside their house and said calmly, "I forgave the first betrayal. I won't forgive the pattern." Those words had felt cruel at the time. Now they felt like the truest thing he'd ever said. His apartment was dark when he arrived home. He turned on a single lamp and made tea, settling into the second-hand armchair he'd bought last week. The space was small, but it was his untainted by lies, free from the weight of broken promises. His phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca, the first in weeks. "I saw you were at Nathan's tonight. Mutual friend mentioned it. I hope you had fun. You deserve happiness, Daniel." "I mean that." He stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Thank you. I hope you find yours too." It was the truth. He hoped Rebecca got the help she needed, hoped she learned to be honest with herself and others, hoped she found peace. But those hopes existed separately from him now. Her journey was no longer his concern. Another text came through, this one from Vanessa. "Great meeting you tonight. Coffee shop rec, Brew Point on 5th. They have an amazing dark roast. Whenever you're free, no pressure." Daniel smiled and typed a response. "How about Thursday?" Outside, fireworks burst across the sky, neighbors celebrating the new year. Daniel watched through his window, sipping his tea. The year ahead felt uncertain but open, full of possibility rather than obligation. He thought about his parents who'd survived his father's affair through hard work and genuine change. He thought about his sister, whose marriage had healed after her husband's betrayal because they both committed to doing better. Those stories had happy endings. His didn't not, in the traditional sense. But maybe that was okay. Maybe some relationships were meant to end so better ones could begin. Maybe sometimes the bravest thing wasn't holding on, but knowing when to let go. Daniel finished his tea and went to bed. Tomorrow he'd wake up in his own space, answerable to no one. He'd go to the gym, maybe call his mother, possibly meet Vanessa for that coffee. Small steps toward a future he was building for himself. But divorce had taught him hard lessons about trust, about forgiveness, about recognizing when love became self-deception. But it had also taught him about resilience, about starting over, about the quiet strength required to walk away from something you'd invested everything in, knowing you deserved better. As he drifted towards sleep, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in over a year. Peace. Real, genuine peace. Not the fragile hope of reconciliation or the exhausting vigilance of trying to rebuild trust. Just peace with his choices, with his boundaries, with the knowledge that he'd done everything he could and it still hadn't been enough. And that was okay. He'd forgiven the first betrayal because he'd believed in second chances. He'd refused to forgive the pattern because he'd learned to believe in himself. That distinction, painful as it was to learn, had set him free.